During a family vacation, my mother snatched my purse and said, "We'll be using your credit card for this trip." I smiled and said, "Then you'll love this message from the bank." She started screaming when she read it. That was the moment I knew this trip was about to go sideways. My mother, standing in the middle of the airport terminal, clutching my purse like she had just won the lottery, had that smug look on her face. The same one she always had when she thought she was getting her way. "We'll be using your credit card for this trip," she said, grinning like she had just pulled off the heist of the century. I smiled so wide it probably unsettled her, and then I pulled out my phone, tapped my banking app, and turned the screen toward her. "Then you're going to love this message from the bank." Her expression shifted instantly, the color draining from her face, as her eyes darted over the screen, and then she started screaming. But let me back up a little. I was raised in a way that made it hard for me to say no. Every fiber of my being was screaming at me to say no, but I knew if I refused, I'd be painted as the selfish daughter who didn't care about her family. The guilt trips, the emotional manipulation, the constant phone calls, I knew exactly how it would play out. So I agreed, but on one condition: I would book my own flight and hotel room. No shared accommodations, no way for them to access my money. I was going, but I wasn't going to let them take advantage of me. My mother hated that. She pouted, she whined, but she eventually let it go. Or so I thought. Fast forward to the airport, we had just landed, and I was already exhausted. I had spent the entire flight mentally preparing for whatever nonsense my mother was about to pull, and sure enough, as soon as we got to baggage claim, she made her move. She snatched my purse right out of my hands. "We'll be using your credit card for this trip," she said, all smug and triumphant. I didn't even flinch. I just smiled, pulled out my phone, and opened my banking app. Then I turned the screen to face her. Her eyes skimmed the message, then she read it again, and then she screamed. You see, I knew this was coming. I had learned years ago that my mother was relentless. She would pull stunts like this every chance she got, and I had spent a long time making sure she would never get another dime from me. A week before the trip, I called my bank and explained everything: the financial abuse, the manipulation, the lengths she would go to get access to my money. The bank rep was sympathetic, but more importantly, they were helpful. Together, we set up some very specific security measures. My card was locked to my location, meaning any charges made outside my immediate area would be flagged and declined, unless I approved them through my banking app. Then, for extra protection, I had my daily spending limit set to exactly $1. My mother stared at my phone, her fingers gripping my purse so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "What did you do?" she hissed. I shrugged. "Bank security. They thought it was weird that I suddenly had all these big charges coming from a place I hadn't been yet." Her face twisted in fury. "Fix it right now." My mother wasn't the type to take defeat gracefully. She was already plotting. I checked into my hotel feeling pretty damn proud of myself. My room was on a different floor from my parents', a deliberate move on my part. I needed space, I needed a buffer. But the next morning, the real nightmare started. I woke up to banging on my door, not knocking, banging like someone was trying to break it down. I groaned, rolled out of bed, and checked the peephole. It was my mother, and she was furious. I barely had time to brace myself before she started screaming through the door. "Open this door right now, we need to talk." I sighed, debating if I should just pretend I wasn't in, but I knew her. If I ignored her, she'd just make an even bigger scene. So, I cracked the door open an inch, keeping the chain locked. She shoved a crumpled piece of paper through the gap. "The front desk says our card was declined. We can't check into our room, fix it." I stared at her. "You didn't prepay." She scoffed. "Why would we? We were planning to use your card, obviously." I wanted to laugh. I wanted to laugh so hard I cried. Instead, I handed the paper back. "Sounds like a you problem." She slammed her fist against the doorframe. "You think this is funny? Where are we supposed to sleep?" I shrugged. "Maybe you should have brought your own money." She lost it, screaming threats, the whole 9 yards. She accused me of abandoning my family, of humiliating her, of ruining the trip. Then I remembered he was just as guilty. He never stopped her, never stood up for me, never once told her she was out of line. I shook my head. Not my problem, and then I closed the door in her face. But she wasn't finished. An hour later, my phone started blowing up: calls, texts, voicemails. I ignored them all. Then came a knock on my door, a polite one this time. I checked the peephole. Not my mother, not my father, hotel security. I sighed, knowing exactly where this was going. I opened the door. "What's the issue?" The security guy gave me a tight smile. "Your parents are at the front desk. They're saying you stole their money and left them stranded." I laughed, a full genuine laugh. "You're kidding, right?" He didn't laugh back. "They're insisting you let them stay in your room." "Oh hell no," I crossed my arms. "Do they have proof that I stole anything?" He hesitated. "Well no, but," I cut him off. "Then they're lying. I booked my own room. I paid for it with my own money. They tried to steal from me, and now they're facing the consequences. That's not my problem." He looked a little uncomfortable. "Look, I'm not trying to take sides, but they're saying they have nowhere else to go. The hotel is fully booked." Another voice chimed in from behind him. "She's right." I leaned past security, and saw the hotel manager standing there. A middle-aged woman with sharp eyes, and the exhausted look of someone who had dealt with one too many entitled guests. She turned to me. "I checked the system. You paid in full. Your parents, however, did not. If they can't provide another payment method, they'll have to leave." My mother's voice shrieked from down the hall, and just like that, they were gone. But my mother had one last trick up her sleeve. That night, I went down to the resort bar to grab a drink. I had just started to relax when my phone buzzed again, a notification from my bank. Attempted login from an unrecognized device. I sat up straight, my stomach dropped. Then another notification, password reset requested. I felt my blood go cold, I knew exactly what was happening. I sprinted back to my room, locked the door, and pulled up my banking app. Sure enough, someone, I wonder who, had tried to reset my password. I immediately changed everything, new password, two-factor authentication, security alerts cranked to the max. Then I did something I should have done a long time ago. I called my bank and put a fraud alert on my account. And then I sent my mother a text, nice try. Hope you enjoy the rest of your trip. No response, but the next morning I got a call from my dad. She's saying you locked her out of the bank. I smiled. No, I locked me out of the bank. She just happened to be trying to break in at the time. Silence, then he sighed. You know how she gets. Yeah, I said, and I'm done with it. And that's when I made my final move, but trust me, my mother didn't take it well. I was done playing defense, it was time to go on the attack. I had spent my whole life letting my mother get away with things. She'd lie, manipulate, steal, always with the excuse that she was my mother, and that family takes care of each other. But this, trying to break into my bank account, that was crossing a line even she couldn't excuse. So I made a decision. I pulled out my laptop, logged into my accounts, and did something that would. You can click on share and more to see if there is a part 2.